Hello everyone, welcome to another installment of Outsiders on the Inside here at the Resurgent, and we're joined by Congressman Louie Gohmert of Texas's 1st District. Thank you so much for joining us and taking time out of your schedule to chat with us. So I wanted to first touch upon the Las Vegas shooting, and I know everyone is polarizing it with the calls for gun control, but I think it's rather interesting that many of your Democrat colleagues are rushing to not observe a moment of silence for the victims and these hasty calls to take away firearms when even leftist sources like 538 and others have reported that new gun control measures wouldn't have prevented everything. So what are your comments?
Well, that's been the situation after any terrible event that involved a gun. People have rushed to scream for more gun control. And actually, we know from the Obama administration, they prosecuted dramatically less. It was a fraction of the prosecutions for gun violations during the Bush administration. So the Obama administration was not using the laws we had. And in fact, when you have somebody like the Las Vegas shooter, there were surely many laws that he was already violating. To have all the guns he did. Maybe it wasn't a violation to have them rigged to fire as if they were an automatic weapon. But, you know, people were saying we need background checks, you know, at all, with no exceptions. So, you know, you couldn't transfer a weapon to your son or, you know, a family member. You'd have to have a background check on, if you gave one to your father, you'd have to have a background check on your father or on your child. I mean, that's the kind of things they're saying. It needs to have no exceptions for gun shows, and yet, from what I understand, this nut out in Las Vegas, he didn't buy these weapons at a gun show. And what people say, and we need to eliminate the ability to buy them online without a background check. You can't buy them online without a background check because it's going to have to be delivered to a store that has done the background check before they can actually turn the weapon over to you. I've been through that. I know that is the way it is. So there are all of these bogus claims of things we need to do. And once again, when you go through and you examine everything that everyone has proposed, we've got to immediately do these things. And then you have so-called comedians on television trying to dictate policy. They don't even understand the difference between semi-automatic and automatic. But the thing is, you look at what they're proposing, it's either already required or it would never have made a difference. You couldn't follow through on the Rahm Emanuel idea that, you know, never let a good crisis go to waste. And that's what we're seeing with the Las Vegas event. And whether it was a school shooting, whatever it's been, people rush in and propose, we got to do this now. If you're not willing to do this now, then you're as bad as the shooter. And then you ask, okay, let's be rational. Would this have stopped the Las Vegas shooting? And in every case I'm hearing, say, well, no, it wouldn't have changed that, but we got to do something. And if you're not willing to do something, you know, your name, you're just as bad as the criminal that did the shooting. Really? That is asinine. And anybody that takes that position obviously is exposing their lack of proper education.
And normally they don't handle firearms. People come out of ignorance, like Hillary Clinton was tweeting that how did silencers relate to this? He didn't even use silencers. Not that even if he did, he was using them in a criminal fashion.
Silencers had nothing to do with this.
They're called suppressors because they don't actually silence them. They just lower the decibels.
And actually, you know, England had made suppressors legal. And so many people say we need the kind of restrictions like England had. They've already figured out that really doesn't make any difference. And certainly, would that have had an effect at Las Vegas? No, not at all. So I would think the best respect we could show to the victims in Las Vegas would be, number one, for those of us that believe in the power of prayer, yes, pray for them. But then, number two, don't do anything to take away people's freedom if it would not make a difference and it prevented the shooting. So, yeah, that's where we are.
Next, I want to talk about the SAVES Act, which was just passed House Natural Resources Committee, and it makes modifications to the Endangered Species Act, which has been contorted and convoluted and rolled up to...
and we've saved less than 1%. Last time I checked, less than 1% of the species that have been declared as, threatened or on the endangered list. And I couldn't believe that we had not done better than that. But my first term here, Rick Pombo was chairman of the Natural Resources Committee, and he worked very hard. We put together a bill. We were trying to work in a bipartisan fashion, but yet some on the other side were just wanting to be nothing but obstructionists. And so we were trying to involve them in every phase. And I made the mistake of thinking the endangered species was only about saving endangered species, because that's the way it was sold to America. And that anything we could do to save endangered species would be a good thing. And I also have heard too many people say that out there in America, I've never participated, nor am I aware of somebody that has. I'm just told they're landowners, and it makes sense, who make their living off their land, who use a philosophy called shoot, shovel, and shut up. In other words, they know if an endangered species is found on their property, the federal government will not be allowing them potentially to use their property in any way that will allow them to continue to support their family. So landowners, I'm told, would shoot and kill, shoot, shovel, shut up. And I thought, the way we could go about doing a better job of preserving the species, and I think the Constitution requires it. I know the courts have ruled, we're not supposed to be deprived of property without due process. The courts, I think it should require compensation if you're going to take away somebody's ability to use their land. But courts haven't agreed so far. But we have the power to do right by people under the Constitution. It doesn't just require the courts. And it seemed like if we put a provision in the Endangered Species Act that would require landowners to be compensated for their loss of the use of the land, if we tell them you can't use it anymore, you got a habitat here for an endangered species, that people would be more willing to say, wow, here's a red-cockaded woodpecker, and so, or whatever the endangered species. You get people to come forward voluntarily more often if they knew it's not going to put them and their family in poverty. I couldn't believe the resistance we got from Democrats on the committee. They didn't want to agree to that. When it's really going to help us preserve the species. People will come forward more readily. And a Democratic friend said, look, they shouldn't even own that property anyway. It belongs to all of us. With all that in mind about the endangered species, we want to save species, right? Well, I have a specific example. We had a landowner in Texas, a conservationist. He raises wildlife, and he does allow some hunting on his land. It's a managed area, and he's in communication with others around the country. Well, they knew that there was a particular type of African oryx that was going extinct in Libya. Well, it's a very desirable animal, which is why they were killing them right and left in Libya for something to eat. But they're not allowed, it's illegal to hunt them in Libya, so you can't keep them on your property and make a living off raising them and breeding them, and so nobody raises them and breeds them, so they wiped them out. And this landowner said that the feds came to him and said, now, you have this particular African oryx in your property, on your property, and they are now endangered. He says, not here in the United States. We have 20,000 of these around the United States because it's legal to hunt them here, and so they're being bred, and we have a tremendous number of them. And in fact, they have sent hundreds of couples back to Africa to let them restock. But since it's illegal to hunt them, they still keep killing them off every time they send them. They can't keep them. But here in the U.S., we have like 20,000. But when the federal authorities said, we're going to declare them endangered, well, you can't do it in a day. And so when they realized they're about to declare them as endangered, and we don't want the federal government telling us what we can or can't do with our property, they got rid of them all over the United States. We know there's a giant clam. Now, I'm not a big clam fan, but aquariums have bred these giant clams. They're an endangered species in other parts of the world. They're not native to the United States. But we have aquariums that have these giant clams, and they seem to be pretty fat and happy and enjoying themselves in their aquariums. But they're not native, and they're found as going extinct where they are native. But if they're declared to be an endangered species, then the aquariums will get rid of them before that can be declared. So it's very clear, if we're really about saving endangered species, then for heaven's sake, let's at least not declare non-native species to America as endangered here, so that landowners and aquariums and animal lovers can breed them here. But the way it stands right now, you cannot even transport them across state lines once they're declared to be endangered. And some were worried that my bill that would eliminate non-native species from the endangered list would prevent being able to go after poachers and ivory traders and traffickers, rhino tusk traffickers. But those are still under the CITES. It's an international organization that tries to protect endangered species. And they're listed. You can't traffic them, you can't transport them, even now, even if my bill becomes law, which I hope it will. And so we passed that today out of committee. It's a common sense thing to do, but in Washington, D.C., things that are common sense back in Texas are only sense here because it isn't common.
I want to conclude with asking you, what has been the most challenging part of being an outsider here in D.C.? You've been here for a long time, but you haven't adopted the swamp-like qualities. What would you say has helped keep you afloat in D.C.?
Well, the challenge of dealing with leadership since I've been here, I like Paul Ryan, but I'm talking about past history, who were more attuned to the establishment, the swamp, the K Street folks, you know, whoever gives the big bucks and more of what we want to pursue, even in the things we promised people we would do. And actually we're dealing with that right now in the Senate. I mean, I think every Republican but one promised we would repeal Obamacare. And yet we finally get a deal done in the House, and there was a lot of anguish and wailing and gnashing of teeth, but we came together. And it wasn't perfect. It was at least repealing some of the things that needed to be done. And most important, it was going to bring down premiums and give people more choice. A good idea, I thought. So we get it out of the House, and the Senate has it sit there. And I think probably the most frustrating thing here is people of my own party promising things in their own district, in their own state, if they're a senator, and then coming up here and being completely aloof from the promises that were made. I mean, you know, that is so frustrating. You've got to put a limit on bureaucrats. People that are unelected, that will get into a bureaucratic position, they'll be calling the shots around here. No matter what spot they're in, they're calling the shots. And you find out there's so many laws that Congress has passed. It says it's a crime, or this is the penalty if you violate this law or any regulations hereunder. Well, that means the bureaucrats are going to create the regulations. We're never going to vote on them. We may not agree. You might have 100% of the House and Senate agree. That should not be a regulation. It doesn't matter. We have just empowered unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats, at least unaccountable to the people in America, to make laws that bind us and that even make conduct we have as criminals. So we've got to have term limits on the bureaucrats. You may have seen
much of the agency folks.
Oh yeah.
Because like in Interior, I know they've had a lot of interference with trying to put pro-hunting and fishing measures, and you still have some of the remnants.
Yeah.
And much like the EPA, there's still some resisting to adopt what Scott Pruitt has done.
One of our friends said when he was confirmed in his position that he felt like he had won his congressional election and then got to his office and found out his opponent picked all the people working in his office. It's not quite that bad.
Right.
He has some people that are quite good, he said, but it's almost that bad. You know, they're not people that agree with your agenda, that agree with the people that sent the president here, that picked you. So, you know, there's a lot of bureaucratic clean out that needs to occur. If you've got the authority to make regulations, you shouldn't be in that position very long.
Thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us at the Resurgent. And I think people will find this interview to be very informative. They don't know what goes on with the ESA and other stuff. So, Congressman, thank you so much.
Really my pleasure.
Thank you. All right, and thank you everyone for tuning in. We'll include links to follow the Congressman's office. And thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the next Outsiders on the Inside.